let's get started. Our first presenter is Jinglong Zhao, Assistant Professor, Operations and Technology Management. He's going to be talking about A/B testing of online platforms. Take it away.
Thanks very much for the introduction and for having me here. And thanks everyone for coming. I'm an assistant professor at the operations group, and today I'm going to talk about how do you use A/B testing in online platforms to do the new product development, which is one important concept in operations when firms try to decide if they should bring out a new function to the products. So this is a joint work with my amazing lineup of co-authors: Shan Huang from Hong Kong University, Chen Wang from Hong Kong University, Yuan from Purdue University, and Jinglong Zhao from Tencent, which is the mother company of Tencent WeChat, a biggest social network software in Asia. So back at the end of year of 2022, WeChat came to us with the following question. They were wondering if the new product development of a new search bar design is going to be more beneficial to the firm or not. As you will see on the left-hand side picture, this is a new search bar design. What they would like to compare with is an older version of their search bar design, which we will see on the right. There is an empty space over there. So basically, what they have in mind is that maybe showing the shortcuts of the historical keywords can encourage the users to click on those more often, thus improving their user experience. And that might make the users love to use WeChat even more. So the question is then, is it worth of all the efforts and the costs of putting this into development? Is this really a huge benefit to the firm, or maybe it's not even worth of the cost of all the new product iterations? So they would like to run an A/B test to see if this is going to be more effective. So when we talk about A/B tests, this is one of the most prevailing way that nowadays the technology firms would like to use to see if a new product development is going to be more effective. So basically in the A/B testing, they're going to give these two different search bar designs to two different groups of users. So on the left-hand side, there is a group of users seeing the new design, and some other users are seeing the old status quo. After they assign the users to the two groups, these different users, they actually see two different versions of the search bar. And then the WeChat can measure the responses of the users. And then maybe in one group, the users, if they're more happier than the other group, then this is considered as a success. And then they would like to roll out to the new design. This is the typical pipeline of how do companies at tech firms, they roll out a new design. And such an approach is really, the gold standard of the new product development process, where a lot of the tech firms now, they have integrated all this process into their pipelines. So if you log on to TikTok, if you're looking at the short videos, then you don't even know you're being tested, but you are. If you go to Facebook, if you go to use Instagram, then all the recommender algorithms and even the brightness of the pictures, the size of the buttons, these can all be tested. So to give you a sense of how often are the users involved in A/B tests. So at Microsoft, every week they run about 2,000 experiments back 5 years ago. And nowadays, this number can be even bigger. And each user, usually on average, is being exposed to hundreds of A/B tests per week if you use these modern technology softwares. And this is really how the firms utilize A/B testing to see if their new product development is better. But let's try to be cautious here, because you're running this A/B test, and you measure the user responses from a relatively shorter duration of time. But for these firms, what they care about is not simply the user retention during the shorter term experiments, but rather in the longer run, when they're permanently rolling out this new design. By saying permanently rolling out a new design, I'm referring to the following. Ideally, if you were able to run a longer term experiment, then you can estimate the following long-term treatment effects. Which in the first row, there is a representative user who is being exposed to the red color, to the new design. And you would like to ideally compare this user to someone else who is being exposed to the older version of the design. And if you can keep running this experiment for a long duration of time, then you can estimate the long-term effect of applying this new design. To give you two concrete examples, one is when people look at the 30-day average usage frequency. Here, the small t can be 30 days. And in some other cases, people look at the 3 months user retention. And in some other tech companies, such as Google, they even measure the long-term user retention over the duration of 3 years. So you can think of this time duration as a very long duration of time. But due to the practical limitations, each experiment can only be run for a relatively shorter duration. In this case, the experimental horizon is much shorter, and you can only estimate the effects of the short-term treatments. So unless the short-term treatments is equal to the long-term effect, the short-term effects is equal to the long-term effects, what you're going to estimate directly out of this experiment is not going to fully reflect what's going to happen in the future. To give you a concrete example, let's try to imagine you're now changing the color of the search bar. You're trying to change the shade of gray into a darker color. And then maybe because the color is different, maybe the users would like to click it more often. But when the users are used to it, when the users are used to this new color, if you don't change the contents, if you don't change your recommender algorithms, then you will likely see the increase in the shorter term will eventually decrease and go back to normal. Meaning that in the long run, such a new intervention of simply changing the color of the search button is not going to be very effective. Although in the short-term experiments, this change of color might trick some users to click on it more often. Such a phenomenon is usually referred to as a novelty effect, meaning that when you are running experiment for a shorter duration of time, what you're estimating is the short-term novelty of changing this color, but this is not considered as an effective change of your product function. So my example is pretty common in this online A/B testing scenario because of the user learning effects. When users, they can adapt to the new product developments by changing their user behaviors, then you will see that over time, some effects might decrease, some effects might increase. So this time dependent change in the effect size is going to be ignored if you're only using the short-term experiments to see what's going to happen. So what do we do in this case? We borrow the ideas from the conventional literature when people talk about the surrogates. So in this traditional example, in development economics, people usually look at what is the long-term impact of a short-term intervention. In this example, a group of economists, they look at what is the average return on the childhood class size. So what is the return of income by changing the childhood classroom size as a proxy of the quality of education during K-12 education? So here, if you're going to measure the long-term effects, you're going to measure it when this kid grow up. And you're going to measure this when this kid grows up to maybe 50 or 60-year-old. But the intervention is during the childhood of K-12 education. So here, trying to extrapolate from the K-12 education to the longer-term average income is going to be a problem. It's going to be a challenge. And how this group of economists, they solve this problem? Here, they propose the usage of surrogates. In this case, they are the SAT scores. So immediately after you graduate from K-12 education, you ask the kids to take the SATs. And then you use the exam scores as a proxy of how well are the income of the kids going to be in the next 40, 50 years. So in this example, they were successfully able to measure what is the impact of a short-term treatment effect, being the K-12 education, on the long-term impacts on the outcome through the clever usage of the SAT scores. In our case, we face a slightly different question as they have faced, which is that more often we're comparing consecutive treatments over a long duration of time versus you never roll out this new design. So the intervention here is also going to be long-term. 2 minutes. Okay, awesome. So we have to tweak this surrogate index framework and then try to find our surrogates in this WeChat setup, and then try to use that to predict, to extrapolate to what the long-term effect is going to be. So I will skip all my methods, only show you my results. So we convinced WeChat to run a holdout experiment for 7 weeks. And then out of these 7 weeks, we only used the first several weeks of data by pretending that we were only there. And then we collect the data for the first, say, 3 weeks, and then we use the 3 weeks of data to predict the future. So even though we have the later 4 weeks of data, we don't use it because we were pretending we were standing there at the end of week 3. So here is the plot of the true effects and the confidence intervals. And then using our method by selecting the following surrogates, we can come up with the following predictions. Let's only focus on the middle picture, which is that we're making this prediction at the end of week 3. So we have 3 weeks of data to make the prediction at the end of week 7. And then what we can see is that the red band is going to be our result relative to the blue band, which is from the literature. So in this case, if you only focus on the first 3 weeks of data and then make a prediction, what's usually happening is that you will underestimate the treatment effects because you only have 3 weeks of data and there's an increasing trend. So that's how the benchmark does. And in our case, we were able to use the surrogates to extrapolate and roughly follow this increasing curve. And we changed the amount of data that we have when we use to make this prediction. We change it from 2 weeks, 3 weeks to 4 weeks. And we can see that when we have more and more data, the predictions that we make are going to be more accurate. And the confidence interval that we have is going to be narrower. So that illustrates that you should run experiments for a relatively longer duration as long as possible when you're making these predictions. With that, I'm happy to conclude here with the following 2 takeaways. First, hopefully I have convinced you that A/B testing is very prevalent in modern technology firms. And second, be cautious how to interpret your A/B testing data because that is typically a short-term data. So you have to extrapolate to the long term. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Is there anything you can tell us about the art of identifying good surrogates?
That's a great question. There is no validity test to test if a surrogate is good, because if you're familiar with econometrics models, surrogates is the inverse usage of the instrumental variables. So there is no formal statistical test that can verify it. But practically, what we did was that, let's say we collect 3 weeks of data, and then let's say we collect 3 weeks of data, and then we would like to make a prediction from here. And then what we did here was that let's pretend that we only had the first 2 weeks of data and try to see if we can use the first 2 weeks of data to predict week 3. And then by collecting these surrogates, we can see which one is more relevant. So that's how we practically solve this question. And oh yeah, and the other thing is that based on our experiences here, the shorter term metrics of the longer term things are usually of very good predictive power. For example, if we're predicting the long-term user retention, then usually the shorter-term user retention is going to be a key predictor of that. And so we will always recommend to start from those shorter-term user retentions metrics.
Another question. Thanks for your presentation. I think the biggest takeaway is the longer the treatment is for longer periods, it's going to be better because you have a long-term effects. So have you ever considered the cost in the sense of in the framework of MAB, for example, multi-R bandits, like whether the cost gonna really matter for whether you make a decision to have the long-term treatment? Is there a trade-off out there?
Yeah, as you will see from these three pictures, of course, the more data you collect, the more accurate you're going to predict. So if you want to incorporate cost into this framework, then you have to come up with a metric that shows you how much value is one additional week of data. And if you can quantify that part, then you can weigh it with the costs and then look at the trade-off. So here it really depends on how big of the impact this new search bar design going to be, and how 1% of a prediction error would lead to in practice. Then you can look at this trade-off. Yeah, that would be my 2 cents.
Last question.
Okay, great presentation. Just one question. How do you measure the user's utility? And also you mentioned, for example, for Facebook user or WeChat user, we have been tested for simultaneously, for example, 100 different things. How do you identify this comes from the specific task that you are focusing on? And how to rule out that in, for example, the attention measure or whatever comes from this specific test and not from other 199 tests?
Yeah, very good question. In this example, we did convince WeChat to run a holdout experiment. In this holdout experiment, they dedicated about 1.3 million users to be away from any other experiments. So that for this 1.ish million users, there's only either the intervention or no intervention for 7 weeks. So this is such a commitment from WeChat because I know this is not very common at other tech firms, but they consider it to be so important that they can just separate this 1.ish million users out from the other experiments. And then in our case, we measured the user retention, user usage frequency, which is a binary metric. If you log on to WeChat, it's a 1. If you do not, it's a 0. So this metric is very well specified, and you can clearly tell if it's a 1 or a 0. And for more complicated metrics, then you could think of other ways to measure it, but it's not here.
Okay, let's move on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.